One of the things that I learned early on in my career is that the learning initiatives that really succeed are the ones that are aligned with where the business wants to go. In order for you to have credibility as a learning team, you can't be just an arm of HR. For things that are very specifically tied to sales, having executive buy-in helps us get buy-in for other things that are less linear, like management and leadership development programs that rely on things like AI simulations. It helps us advocate for the funds for things where it may not seem as specifically tied to making sure that we're making the next dollar.
Well, Kelly and Jamie, great to have you today. I really enjoyed meeting with you a few weeks ago and was just amazed by the amount of work and the level of work you're doing. I wanted to hear more about that and share the insights with our audience.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, I like to go straight into it. So maybe the first question is, from what I understand, you two are the only two full-time dedicated learning practitioners. You have folks that are sort of engaged in different ways, but really like a small and mighty team for 26,000 employees. Can you share a little bit more how you're making that work?
Sure. And we're more like minute and mighty, but we're not really. The thing is that we are the only two people who are, as you said, fully dedicated. But there are four other people who are on the team who help out with other aspects of it. So we have someone who helps us with design. We have someone who helps us with the infrastructure of our learning management system. We have someone who does a lot of facilitation and helps us build programs. And then we have another person who helps specifically within the programs that are in North America. I will say you're 100% right when we say that we have almost an outsized impact for the size of the team and certainly for the size of the organization. But we work really well together. And we try to, I think both of us have backgrounds that are from outside of learning development or a little bit more diverse. And so it helps us in some ways think a little bit differently than maybe the ways that we learned how to learn in corporations.
Anything you might add, Jamie, there? Or
I think Kelly really explained it well. I mean, our team is, like Kelly said, we're the two full-time dedicated people for global L&D, but we work really beautifully together as a much larger team too. So we're a larger team of 6 and we are constantly helping each other out with projects.
Yeah. What would be helpful is if you could share the context of your team, what kind of learning programs you're driving for the organization, and the most important principles beyond like being a really effective team that helps you drive this impact within the context.
Sure. So VML is one of the largest creative agencies in the world. And so we have incredibly intelligent, creative people that we need to work for. And we think of it that way. We think of ourselves as service providers. One of the things that I learned early on in my career is that the learning initiatives that really succeed are the ones that are aligned with where the business wants to go. In order for you to have credibility as a learning team, you can't be just an arm of HR. And so having executive buy-in helps us for things that are very specifically tied to sales, helps us get buy-in for other things that are less linear, like management and leadership development programs that rely on things like AI simulations. It helps us advocate for the funds for things where it may not seem as specifically tied to making sure that we're making the next dollar. What are some of the other things that we've talked about a little bit more?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really important is a lot of times, so we merged, we became basically a new organization in January of 2024. And when people started approaching us for learning and development initiatives, they would come to us saying, we want a series of hour-long workshops, or we want an 8-hour program about this. And what we've kind of been able to do and have imparted to people is, rather than listening for the solution that's being proposed to us, is listen for the behavior that they're trying to change, more like the spirit of what it is that they're asking us. And then as learning professionals, go back to them and say, we understand what you're trying to change, or we understand what you're trying to do. Here may be a way to do it that maybe you didn't think about that's a little bit different than the solution that they came to us with, but that will have a larger impact and provide a little bit maybe more value than what they originally came to us with.
Yeah, I'm kind of famous for quoting or misquoting. We're not sure. People say that Henry Ford said that if I asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. Sometimes in learning, everyone in their own mind comes with a learning background. We all went to school somewhere at some point in time. And so we all think in some ways that we understand what the options are, what the solutions can be. And so a lot of times the solutions take the form of things that have already happened, things that they've seen before. And people fall in love with these kinds of solutions. So a lot of what we talk about is how do we move from being an order taker to being the people who are really transforming the organization with the same kinds of creativity that VML brings to the brands that we work with every day. We also have, I would say, a team of owners. Right?
Yes,
we have
for sure.
Everyone on the team feels like they have ownership. And part of that, I think, comes from, I'm not saying don't hire L&D professionals. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that if there was something, a piece of advice that I could give to other people who are executives in my position, it's really think about how can you find people who are owners? And sometimes those people don't come from inside of L&D. We have on our team a sign language interpreter, Jamie. We have Leslie, who attended bar. We have Marv, who was a middle school music teacher. We have Dave, who was also a middle school history teacher. We have Rich, who came from technology, but not learning tech. I have worked in learning for a very long period of time, but my first jobs were really in retail. And I think that grounded me. When you're the kind of person who has to both like stop the shoplifter, answer the back door, be there for the customer, help the corporate person who's come there and who wants their discount, clean the toilet, when you have to do all the jobs, I think generalists grow out of that kind of atmosphere.
I just loved what you shared at the end around one, not listening for the solution, but then understanding what behaviors they're targeting, and then even the profiles you've shared. I think it resonates in particular because our company, Sparkwise, also, we didn't have a lot of people traditionally in L&D, right? Some of us have L&D experience, but it actually came from a lot of consulting backgrounds, and also sort of other profiles have rounded us out. And my sense from what you're saying in my experience is people who've been in a service-oriented role and also very operationally heavy, like sort of service-oriented roles, like really thrive in this environment where you have to, first of all, listen to what people really need, but also have the ability to frame and like help them think differently about that problem, but also then execute on it with real ownership. I think that's kind of a unique set of skill sets.
I think you're right. And I mean, I think that in a lot of ways, that's what selling is about. Selling is really about being able to hear the thing that is unasked for. I think that anyone who's a manager is basically in sales. Anyone who's a teacher is in sales. Anyone who has to serve another human being and has to deal with the ambiguity of discerning what it is that they need in order for them to get the thing that they're trying to do. I don't know what that skill is called, but the idea of taking the ownership to feel responsible for that and to want to fulfill that, I think is something that's really important.
I have a question for you. Not a lot of learning and development functions and teams that I've spoken to feel the authority or the ability to push back, if you will, right? Business comes and asks, hey, like I want this in this very specific form. And there's very strong tension. Beyond sort of hiring team members who's very skilled at this, what are other things that have enabled your organizations to be able to reframe asks from business and actually able to offer solutions that are both effective and scalable?
So going back to when we first merged, I would say that it wasn't always the case that we were able to necessarily offer solutions like that. When we first merged, there was an ask that came through that was basically like, we're a new company. We have all of these new capabilities. We need to educate everybody, from the person in finance who will never need to sell these to the top who support them, to the top salespeople who all they are responsible for is selling. And the solution that was proposed to us in a way was a series of workshops at different levels. What it would have been for these leaders who are ridiculously busy because we just merged and they're trying to figure out their new capabilities would have been a big ask for them, because they would have had to do kind of multiple interviews over multiple hours for different audiences.
Or another suggestion was people wanted it live.
Oh, that was it too.
So if someone couldn't make it, there's a lot of, in a 26,000 person organization, there's a lot of logistics around many live workshops. Mm-hmm. But you were going to say, I'm sorry.
Besides the fact, yes, people wanted live, which posed its own set of challenges, especially for a client-facing organization. We came back with a solution that was a lot less of a lift on the leader, which was, let's kind of tackle 3 tasks with 1 interview. Let's interview them once and get everything we need for everybody, from that person in finance who supports these capabilities to the global client lead who's responsible for selling these capabilities. And how we proposed it was this singular one-time interview with this leader that would result in 3 different deliverables. And because it was such an improvement in efficiency, I think that was really the first way we were able to really earn that credibility to go, oh, this is a learning team that do what it is that we're asking, but possibly in a different way. And I think from there, in
a way that respects the time of that business leader.
Yeah.
Yeah.
that I think is how when we really started to earn the trust of leadership to provide solutions that are respectful of what it is that they're asked.
I forgot about that sort of initial moment. But in terms of other things that we don't do, this is an exception, Vince, but we really don't do a lot of like thought leadership on LinkedIn. We don't spend a lot of time propelling ourselves to sort of the forefront in terms of this is who we are, this is what we do, this is what we believe, this is how we think that AI is changing things. We don't have time to really do that. So we focus on the things that we think will make a difference inside of our organization. We also don't outsource a lot. We can talk a little bit more about this, but I know it sounds counterintuitive, but it allows us greater speed and flexibility and creativity and cost control to do it internally. And with AI, that's really changed the game. We'll talk about it, I'm sure, more, but I don't mean for content creation, but for really coming up with singular, novel, outside of the box solutions that I would have had to pay millions of dollars to a vendor to come up with something and then have many, many, many iterations after that, which would take up a lot more time to do it with someone else. We don't do a lot of workshops. We really don't. We don't do a lot of live things. And we found out that, and the reason for that is not because we didn't start off with the idea. When I first came here in 2022, that was the norm. And I continued that norm for about a year and saw in some ways how ineffective that was and how not global it was. A lot of the vendors that we could find didn't have the time zone empathy or didn't have the language capacity to do the kinds of things. So the quality was inconsistent. I would say there are a lot of things that we don't do, but I would say that they enable us to do the things that we do well.
Very helpful. Can you sort of paint a picture on what an effective learning initiative you rolled out? So like what was an ask you got? What's the thing? And you probably got requests for workshops. What is the thing you actually ultimately developed and rolled out that was scalable and actually met the need? I would love to hear sort of how you reframed it and what solution actually got deployed.
So we had an ask, I would say it was December 17th of last year. So it was right before the holidays. We're coming up on the anniversary of this ask that is burned in my memory. The ask was really around, we have this tool called WPP Open, and WPP Open is a network-wide proprietary AI like operating system. And within VML, it was the largest agency within WPP. Only 9% of people were using it. And so there was a $300 million investment that was protecting about $895 million of client revenue that only 9% of VMLers were using. At the same time, the specific ask was, how do we get people using the platform? And the solution that we saw was these very large workshops where 1,000 people or more would be invited, where you'd have a subject matter expert who would be trying to, through the vagaries of Wi-Fi and the calls dropping out or lots of stuff going on in the chat, like, hey, what did he say? Can you go back a step? Or my
Wi-Fi cut out.
My Wi-Fi cut out. I can't. So like all of these things that were happening. How does an organization the size of VML solve a challenge like that very, very quickly?
Some of the things that we had noticed, in addition to all of that stuff that was going on with these live workshops, there were people that were asking questions that told us even where these workshops were starting was a little bit too far ahead of where some people were. Like they were saying they were looking for like an app on their computer. It wasn't an app, it was a website. Even when I first used the platform, I would log in and then I would be stuck because I would forget like where to click to get into the tool that I wanted to use. And a lot of the live workshops were about showing the end product of like, here's all the really cool things you could do. Now go experiment. It's like, I would love to, but I can't remember what I'm supposed to click.
And I can't remember the URL I'm supposed to type in, or
right.
whether it's or whether I'm just missing the icon on my desktop. There was an assumption that people were further along than where they were. And there was already a perception, I wouldn't say in the industry, but here, I think there was a perception that AI had passed people by. People felt like they were already behind and couldn't ask a naive question. So it was really about how do we simultaneously educate the organization on where do we need to start, which is not where you think it is. We're not telling you that we want to go back, but we're saying it's necessary to in order to go forward fast. And so then
on top of that, also we had to assuage some fears, especially around creative professionals that were afraid, if I learn how to use this, AI is then going to take my job and I'm going to be out of a job. Going kind of back to the beginning, we built a series of 8 micro courses, 3 that we called micro learnings, which were less than 10 minutes that were really informational. One was called Everyday Artificial Intelligence, and that was really about what AI is, what it can do, what it can't do.
And it was really, that was really filling the gaps. So WPP had come out with a general awareness training around AI, but there were some things that were missing from it that people needed to understand, like things like a context window. AI doesn't remember the things that you put in there, that you actually have to, it's like Groundhog Day each time. Or, things about biases, how biases can be perpetuated by AI, or where do I go if I have a question about WPP Open? It's like, how do you build the perfect prompt? And then one was about what is an agent, so that people can understand that at the time, agentic AI, while it was out of order in terms of understanding, people were hearing about it. So we wanted to, in some ways, to use your word, assuage their fears around like that, you're teaching me, from square one, but I keep hearing about agents. How does that connect to where I am now? We wanted those 3 courses. And then Jamie did something absolutely incredible.
Yeah, I would say the crux of these were 5 what we called micro methods. We took the WPP Open environment and built a simulated version of it in our learning management system using essentially screenshots and videos.
But it doesn't look like
it doesn't look like screenshots and videos, but it's using articulate storyline. We built these step-by-step walkthroughs that had tooltips that would come up as people were using it, that really, from looking at your desktop, starting from your blank desktop, where do you click step by step? And we taught people how to do 5 different things using AI that kind of everybody needs to do during the course of their day, but that aren't necessarily the crux of your job. They're just kind of the things that go along with it. Like,
take a lot of time.
Summarize meeting notes and compose follow-up emails with action items to each participant in the meeting. Take a several 100-page report and distill kind of the main insights, and then action those however would be fit for your job. Create some visuals for a presentation or a pitch. So conversation coach, and then building an agent to do something that you will need to do over and over again, which we did like a presentation expert to give feedback on presentations. So we walked people through step by step where they actually had to click through the exact same way that they would in WPP Open, the simulated environment, to practice doing these things. And that's how we really sort of implemented the behavior change of, once people saw how they could do it and got the tooltips to go along with it, we then brought them into the WPP Open environment where they've already seen it. It's not new to them anymore. And then they can go ahead and do these things for real and apply them to their job, however it is that they see fit.
Yeah. So essentially, you learned how to do these 5 things. And at the end of each one of them, there was a link that said, go to Workspace. And the go to Workspace link was a way of almost testing whether or not people would change their behavior. And what we found was that no one was forced to click this go to Workspace button. And I would say that in most of the training throughout my life, micro method would be enough. I mean, actually, I'd never seen a micro method built before, but AI helped us do that in terms of, helping to learn how to code in JavaScript, which was not something that, again, it would have been nice if we had all the budget in the world to engage a vendor to build that for us. It would have also been nice if a vendor that we called us back, but it was, again, the week before Christmas. No vendors were returning calls at that time. I think they finally got back to me about 6 months later. But the idea was that, we needed to do it ourselves. And so we did. And this go to Workspace button, what it did was it proved that almost 8,000 times people chose to practice. So they finished the micro method and then they clicked the button and they went directly to the Workspace. Could we see what they were doing when they got there? No, we could not. That wasn't something that we could do, but we could see that they had actually taken a moment after what they had just learned in a simulated environment to go and do something for real. The metrics really bore out. We became the #1 user of WPP Open in the WPP network. It's a position that we still hold to this day.
That is awesome. And I love that you were able to track the real behavior change that happened. One of the things that organizations struggle with, these asynchronous kind of courses or learnings, is that people really don't pay much attention and they really struggle to get people to care about it and do it. What do you think allowed your initiative to actually be something people spend any time on?
We did have a ton of support from leadership because this was something that really came from the CEO. Leadership was very encouraging, and as much as they could, really required people to take this. When designing asynchronous learning, it's really something that is what we call like value for time. Mm-hmm. making sure that if we're asking people to do something, that they walk away with something actionable that they feel like was useful to them while they were learning it, but also something that they can then carry over into their jobs.
I was going to say, Jamie explained before the way that there were 3 different asks when we first merged. She talked about how we took those 3 asks. We looked at all the questions and all the needs that we had and distilled it down into one 90-minute interview with an executive where they were also recording during that time. So it was an interview, but it was also teaching us how to educate the organization. I use this word a lot, that I feel like we're translators. So a lot of times we get a lot of stuff, a lot of decks, or we get a lot of subject matter expertise. It's not built for learning. It's built for information, or it's built for marketing to persuade some other audience that is not a learning audience. I think a lot about when I was on the sales floor. And I think a lot about how I had no time. Maybe I was doing some sort of learning while I was eating my lunch. And I don't think that the world has changed very much. And I don't think that just because I'm not in a retail organization that people have any more time in their day. And maybe they have, in some ways, they have less time because the demands maybe are even greater. If you're due to meet with the CEO of Coca-Cola, it's probably more important than when I was selling people shirts and ties. The idea here is the same, though. It's how do you become a conduit? Like, how do you become the distiller of what is most valuable and put it in the language that is clever, that is respectful, that's conversational? How do you build something for people to learn from is the way that, we try to think about it. But it's really about thinking deeply about the learner and what is it that is going to build the credibility with them, because you are so ultra respectful of every single word that you give to them, which is why, and I don't recall if I said this already, we don't use AI to build content. We're excellent writers, and we will use AI as a thought partner. We will use AI as a skeptical audience. We will use AI as an editor to say, what am I saying here that's maybe overly wordy, or what darling am I not killing that I should? AI creates a lot of very mid content. I would say more on the very a lot than the mid. It's sometimes the content is good, but it's so telltale. It's almost like when you come upon content that is not written by AI, it feels like a breath of fresh air. I don't think that AI is capable yet of being that writer, but AI is an excellent thought partner. AI is an excellent teacher for the kinds of things, the kinds of solutions, the kind of brilliant, novel things that we might want to come up with. Not that AI thinks of the solutions, but that AI can help us test and go to market faster. AI can sort of suss out when we're being too precious. Those are the kinds of things that really help us build the kinds of things that make it feel valuable, to be learning with us or alongside us.
Yeah. I just really love what you said about like distilling and keeping the quality really high. There's been a lot of trend in L&D about more and more and more content. Somehow volume is a positive thing. But actually, I think in a busy world, people need someone to actually really distill only the most critical things that you have to learn. And in fact, most people really struggle to hold that much information in their heads. So you want to really shorten sentences to their core, content to their core. And to your point, AI is not good at that. It's good at like creating a lot of content. It sounds kind of generic. Within there are some jewels that you could pick. They have to exercise critical thinking, and being that sort of quality and elegance, I think is really key.
Elegance is a great word. Again, going back to qualities to look for in terms of L&D professionals. I remember cover letters used to be such a big thing because it helped people really discern, is this human actually the person who is doing this work? But how well can you communicate? How well can you effectively put your point across in a very short period or a very short space? And now that with the proliferation of content, it's almost like you're doing everyone a favor if you can write beautifully and short. The things that you're putting out is almost like cutting through all of the proliferation and the noise that people are so assaulted with, I think, in some ways.
Yeah. You had a great example of how you use this asynchronous learning experience to drive very measurable, like kind of urgent priority. What are other kinds of learning experience you also offer for the organization that's a little bit different from that, but you've seen a similar kind of impact and that is still scalable given the, small and mighty team size?
Kelly had mentioned earlier about the extra content like management and leadership that you kind of get to do that is impactful, but is a little bit less linear maybe than some other content. we started a management leadership series we call HI, stands for Human Inclusive, Human Intuitive, Human Intelligent, and Human something else.
I don't know, but the idea was really around that it's a series about management and leadership development that embraces AI while teaching the skills that make us irreplaceable as humans. The idea was that while HI stands for all of these things that helped us kind of design the core principles, it was also that AI may seem very complex, that connecting with humans could be as simple as hi.
I love that.
Management leadership series is meant to be released in episodes, similar to a podcast or a Netflix series, things like that. The first season is around conversational agility. So it was all about having difficult
And
conversations.
I came up with that word. You won't find that somewhere. We use that word, but please don't try to look that up. That's something that
Conversational agility, you mean?
Conversational agility. Yeah.
I like
The
it.
idea that there are going to be situations that come up in a management or leadership role that require some sort of adeptness at having conversations that may not be the easiest to have all the time, whether they're around performance or business decisions, things like that.
But that you always want them to feel safe, that you always want them to be effective, but that they require kind of almost like when we talk about learning agility, it's the same kind of thing, like this ability to adapt to the kind of conversation that needs to be had.
The creation of this series is also, it's completely asynchronous. We use content that mostly Kelly, but we've written, and vendor content. So we've used content from Masterclass, and we also, for the second episode, use an AI conversation simulation tool called Yoodli, Yoodli, for anybody who hasn't heard of it. And you can design very specifically like parameters of this conversation that you want people to practice, and then build a rubric that people get instantaneous feedback on how they do during this conversation. Because it's an AI simulation, it's available 24 hours a day, whenever people want, completely psychologically safe space, because you're not having a conversation like you would in a role play in a live workshop where there's 30 or 50 people looking at you. Having this be completely asynchronous and something that's done when it's convenient for people, one, allows them to do it around their work. So if they have a bunch of meetings and they have sort of 15-minute intervals during the day, they can still get it done. But also the asynchronous aspect of it allows the impact to be outsized, because people can feel a lot safer talking about these things that they may not want to admit that they struggle with, or may not realize they struggle with, but upon getting feedback, realize that there are things they can improve upon, but also feels like they're not doing it in a space that's risky, where somebody can then go talk about what they saw, or that the first time they're having the conversation is when they're really having the conversation, and there's a lot more at stake. So there are benefits to, I think, the asynchronous format that you just can't get in a live situation.
Yeah, and with HI, we actually measured two things. So within the program itself, within the asynchronous learning, we measured confidence. So we started off at a baseline by understanding the answer to a question, which was, if you had to have a difficult conversation tomorrow, how confident are you that you would do it and that it would turn out well? And so we asked them that at the beginning before they had any kind of learning. Then we asked them again the same question. We took them through a framework, a bespoke framework that we created around basically like, here's the steps and then here's the way that you go about it. And we used a combination of, I would say, a bespoke framework that was based around the Crucial Conversations state framework, but also with some additions of radical candor. But that's where the masterclass content came in. So we took them through the framework. We introduced them to radical candor. We gave them some learning that way. And one of the interesting things too is that we found, going back to your question, it's so hard to get people to learn asynchronously. We also found a lot of our research points to the fact that if you provide people with quality content, but you don't force them to take it, they will continue on past, like when we gave them the radical candor, or we gave them other masterclass vignettes to listen to, we found that they listen to about 60% more than what we require, like in order for you to be able to finish the program effectively. So it's really interesting how people will keep going, but they also want the choice when they keep going and how they keep going. We asked them the question after they learned about the framework and radical candor. And then we asked them again after they had the AI simulation practice. And so what we found was that the content, the human framework, built a lot of confidence. People felt increasingly confident. Their confidence went up almost 2 points out of 10. So they started at a 7 as a baseline, and then they went up to almost a 9. So it's kind of hard to get more confident after that. The AI practice didn't produce a ton more confidence. It was fractional in terms of the confidence. But, in traditional learning, confidence is really all we could measure. All we could do is ask the questions in some ways. We couldn't kind of spy on people as they were doing the thing in their actual everyday work. But with an AI simulation, they can continue to practice the same scenario and they can pick their avatar. They can choose what they're going to talk about. So it's not like we're giving them the entire scenario. It's something that they can really make their own. And what we noticed was that from their first simulation to their third simulation, their competence goes up. They're spending about, like when I was at Tiffany, Jamie and I actually just rapidly did the math before we spoke to you. In a 2-day program, I was spending about 5 hours doing role play. In this, people are spending about 45 minutes doing 3 different role plays, and then they continue to practice on their own for the micro areas that they need to get better on. So they're not having the whole conversation. Maybe they're just practicing one part of it. So it's really interesting because people get immediate feedback. It's extremely personal to who they are, and they're able to practice specifically their pain point. What we found out is that our human-centered framework, we can't measure what competence it raised, but in terms of confidence, it was huge. When we introduced AI into the equation, we could measure competence. We could measure the gains in their ability to actually apply the framework we gave them and get better at it, the specific areas that they needed to get better at. So while AI doesn't build confidence, it can build competence. And that was one of the things that we found. And again, for a team our size to be able to carry out in a 2-day workshop, I could work with 31 people at a time. Now we can work with thousands of people. Yeah. At a time.
I love that. Thanks for that example. It's very concrete, and it's really glad to see sort of how the different elements build different aspects of the participant skill development journey, and also how you're able to capture that into a metric that you can then share. Any one last word of advice for learning and development leaders who might be listening to this?
Sure. I think traditionally, a lot of learning either doesn't measure impact at all, or in an attempt to measure impact, measures things like attendance or completion metrics or ratings of some sort, NPS, or even qualitative feedback. How did you like the facilitator on a scale of 1 to 5? Things that you kind of know at the beginning what people are going to say. People are very nice. And so it's rare that I think people are going to rate things poorly. In the last year, I would even say like our shift to measuring impact really has taken a turn to be, how do we measure behavior change? What does behavior change look like? And how can we build that measurement into the program itself so that it doesn't feel like something extra for the learner to do, but is incorporated into the learning? Example, like that go to workspace button. Nobody knew that we were tracking to see how many people clicked it. We were just providing people a way to say, you learned how to do this. Would you like to go practice it for real now? On the back end, we're counting how many people said yes and went to the workspace. In having these rubrics that were able to measure competence, it's a part of the program that is allowing people to practice these critical conversations in a psychologically safe space, but on the back end is allowing us to say, look how this practice is improving people's competence. I think identifying the behavior change right from the beginning, like what behavior is it that we want to change? Do we have the ability to measure it? Because there is some data you just will never get access to, but do we have the ability to measure it? And if so, how can we measure it in a way that is creative and doesn't put an extra burden on the learner?
Yeah, what they call in learning an authentic performance task. You don't want it to be something extra to their job. You should really be surprised when you get your data back. What I mean by that is that if you're not surprised, you're probably not being daring enough. If you know that something is going to work, or if you have the ability to cherry pick your data, or if you choose your metrics after the program has started and say like, well, obviously it succeeded because, we were looking for a 10% lift and we got it. What I would say is that as an L&D professional, AI gives you the ability to solve problems that we've never been able to solve by ourselves. That doesn't mean, again, using AI to create the content, but it means using AI as a thought partner. So if you already know what the answer is, then your program is not looking to change behavior. You're looking to keep a job that maybe you don't deserve. Because really, if we're in the business of changing behavior and we're in the business, people are entrusting their time to us. And the best thing that we can possibly do for them is to be daring so that they can actually feel safe and that they can get better and better every day at the things that they're asked to do.
I love that. Thank you both for taking the time to share the incredible work you're doing. Hopefully this is the start of many conversations like this. I hope everyone will take away some of the lessons that you shared. So thanks for the conversation.
Thanks so
Thank
much,
you.
Vince.